Okay, so today we're going to talk about the different types of tissues, and we're going to begin with epithelial tissue. And so one thing I want to point out that wasn't pointed out in the lab lesson from last week are some of the commonalities that you're always going to find in epithelial tissues. Now, if you remind yourself, epithelial tissues are found on surfaces or lining the inside of glands. And so we want to talk about, because they're on a surface, they have this thing called polarity. And that means one side of the tissue is near the surface and the other side is near the connective tissue underneath. So again, if we're looking at this slide, we've looked at this before. We know that this top portion is the epithelial tissue. We know that this bottom portion is the connective tissue. And if you remember, the white space is the surface. And so one edge, okay, is up here near the surface, and then the other edge of the cells, the other side of the cells, are down here near the connective tissue. And so this is called polarity. It means that one side of the cell is not the same as the other. Now, if we're actually doing a close-up of the cell, we can see something that looks like this. So, okay, so if we look at this, up here towards the top would be where the surface would be at, okay? And then down here towards the bottom would be the underlying connective tissue. And then here, my mouse is drawing the edge of the cell. So this is the edge of the cell, this is, and all of these little finger-like projections are also the surface of the cell. So the side of an epithelial cell that is near the surface is called the apical surface. This here and this over here is called the sides. And down here at the bottom, the part that would be closest to connective tissue is going to be the basal surface. Now they call it basolateral, meaning the base and the sides. Okay? And what happens is that underneath this basal part is what's called the basement membrane. And this basement membrane is just connected, or is just extracellular matrix that kind of acts a little like a glue and glues these epithelial cells down onto the connective tissue that's going to be there underneath. Okay. So if we're going to our notes packet, okay, and let's look here. So we've got our apical surface, base, and the sides, okay. It says the two surfaces of epithelial cells are the apical surface and the basolateral surface. And the basolateral surface consists of the base and the sides, okay. And what borders each cell surface? Well, on the apical surface, what's going to border that surface is going to be the either outside or inside surface. Okay. What borders the base is going to be the basement membrane with connective tissue underneath. And what borders the sides? Well, if we look, you notice here's the side of one cell. And what borders it is another cell. So cells are going to be squished up together along the sides. So what borders it are other cells. Okay. Now, one thing that I want to point out as you look at this image is if these cells are next to each other, we have to have something that really helps stick them together. Otherwise, they're just going to be individual cells that could do their own thing. We want them working together as a tissue. And so what helps do that are cell-cell junctions. Okay, and there's going to be a few different types. So if you notice up here, these are what's called a tight junction. And let me kind of explain this figure here. So this is the membrane of one cell, and then over here is the membrane of the other cell. And you notice those membranes at these places, they are locked up tight next to each other. So it would be impossible for a molecule, or almost impossible for a molecule, to try and wiggle in between these plasma membranes. And so that's what helps this type of tissue with tight junctions be a really good barrier. Nothing's getting in between the cells to the underlying connective tissue. Okay, and you should take note, where is it located? Well, it's located on the sides. Okay, it's not on the apical surface, it's not on the base. We have another type of junction, gap junctions, and if you notice, these things right here look an awful lot like channels, and in pink we've got one cell membrane and we've got another cell membrane. Okay, and so what this does is this allows molecules to quickly move from the cytoplasm of one cell through the channel into the cytoplasm of the other cell. And in this way, cells can work together because they're essentially sharing cytoplasms. Excuse me. So then the other one, well, and I guess I should say, ask yourself, where is this one located? You can think about what we just said for tight junctions, and that should help you with this one. Then we've got a thing called desmosomes. Again, we've got one plasma membrane here, another here. These plasma membranes aren't necessarily locked up tight next to each other, so potentially molecules could go between the cells. But you can think of these as kind of interlocking fingers, and they help those cells, these are proteins, and they help those cells grab on tight to one another. You notice that it's just in one location like this over here. If we move me up out of the way, here it's just in one location, here's another one. So some people think of desmosomes as buttons, and think about, where is it located? Is it on the apical surface, the sides, or the base? And finally here on hemidesmosomes, okay, hemi means half, okay, so hemidesmosomes. You notice that here is the plasma membrane of the cell, okay, here's inside of that cell. And notice that it's hooking down into the basement membrane, so it's not actually hooking to another cell as all of the other ones do. So this is kind of a button, in a way, a junction, that helps this cell stick to the basement membrane below us and makes that contact very tight. So those are the cell-cell junctions. And so if we go here, and let's think about the chart, and I can help you out with the first one. So first let's look at tight junctions. And it says, does the intercellular attachment join two cells or a cell to the extracellular matrix? Well, if we look back at our picture, okay, and we look at our tight junctions, well, here's the cell, here's the plasma membrane of the other cell. It looks like those tight junctions are joining two cells together. So we would say it's joining two cells. And what cell surface? Well, we already said that it's on the sides. And what is the function of this? Well, it's going to tightly connect cells together, and it allows nothing to move between the cells to underlying connective tissue. Okay. So I want you to go through, I think you know enough on these others, given what we've just talked about, to fill out these other parts. Let me just make sure that the function is proper, or is that you know the functions for these. So on gap junctions, this allows neighboring cells to share their cytoplasms so they can work together. Okay, desmosomes, they're the button. I'll put that in parentheses. Button. and these allow strong cell-to-cell attachments. And then hemidesmosomes, you can also think of them as a button, but these allow a strong connection to underlying basement membrane. Okay. So I believe that takes us through polarity. Here's a drawing to help you think of this if you'd like to. That takes you through intercellular junctions. Make sure that you go through and you read about some of the other characteristics that epithelial cells have. For example, that they regenerate easy, which means they can regrow. They're avascular, meaning they don't have any blood vessels. And they do provide sensory information to us, so we do have nerves up in epithelial tissues. Okay, and again, these are some activities to help you learn this material more.